Welcome back to another episode of the Max Stern Podcast. Kyle Stetcher alongside James Finch. And today we are going to kind of do a prospective look to the offseason, talk about some of the names that were out there at the trade deadline, kind of some smoke around there that didn't materialize for one reason or another, and then talk about how that could affect what happens in the offseason. So there have definitely been some names trickling out in the days after the trade deadline and everything. So we'll see where things go with a few of those. That's kind of the idea of this episode. Give another look at the unrestricted free agent landscape in particular, because the big trade Mikko Rantanen going back to Dallas or going to Dallas with an extension was a big move, but it also takes a top unrestricted free agent off the board at forward. And that group had some big names, but could get thin very, very quickly, and teams seemingly want to spend money. So I think it's good to kind of recap, or not recap, but kind of look forward to that this offseason. So we appreciate you listening. Max Stern Podcast available on pretty much all major podcast platforms. Our content, including the contract projections we'll reference here and there in this episode, are available on X and Blue Sky, pinned post at AFP Analytics, and we appreciate you following us on those places. So let's get into some of the names that were out there. So kind of trades or names that were talked about for whatever reason and not ultimately moved. And we'll kind of dive into that a little bit and probably lead right naturally into the unrestricted status of certain players and stuff along that line. So I guess we'll start with Toronto. So the big move that was made was Mikko Rantanen was traded to Dallas. There's come out that there were 4 teams, I think, that Rantanen had said that he might be willing to sign an extension with. Florida Panthers, not surprising. Vegas, right, also not surprising. Dallas, where he ultimately went. And the 4th team, I think the Bob father himself had put it out there, Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's where the story ends.
It's not. And going off of rumors and reports, supposedly Marner was asked to waive his no-move clause, which means there was, again, if it's true, there was pretty much a Marner for Rantanen deal lined up.
Yep.
Whether there was anything extra on either side, we don't know. But, yeah, so, that's a pretty serious thing to not happen ultimately mid-season when you're about to go on a playoff run. Everything I saw as far as Marner being interviewed and asked about it seemed like he was kind of just continuing right in stride. He's had a pretty good season. I guess I don't know exactly where you want to take this specific conversation, but I do just quickly want to say I wonder if there's any type of impact negatively, whether it's in that room or to Marner just himself, kind of moving forward the rest of the season or into the playoffs.
Yeah, a little while ago, Brad Treliving, I can never say his name right.
Treliving,
I
think.
I can never get it right the first time. He was asked about that in a kind of impromptu scrum. One question, shut it down really quickly.
Yeah.
But yes, I think the fact that it got out there and the fact that it seemingly might have been a thing had Marner said yes. And to be very clear, Marner's fully in his right to say no to that trade. He earned that no trade protection.
Full could block anything he wants to.
So fully in his right. But the fact that it was seemingly out there, I mean, if the Bob father himself is kind of putting it out there, he said on himself on TSN, he doesn't have the same sources anymore, but he's not going to put something out like that if it's not true.
Exactly. He's You don't hear from him nearly as often, but when you do, like, you should
Yeah.
you should trust it. So I don't know.
It was a trade that I think even I had talked about when we did your trade board episode. I might have kind of been like, I wonder if this could be a thing. I even played around on like cap wages to see like how the money could work and
yeah.
everything. What it brings up to me is if Toronto was willing to include Marner in a trade for Rantanen and seemingly extend Rantanen, what is their plan this summer with Mitch Marner?
So this is tough because kind of going back to last year, even previous years, just random things happening here and there as far as dynamic between some of the stars in Toronto. You get conversations, whether it's insiders, different media members. We've talked about it before about what's the best way to use the cap space. Should they be so heavy as far as top players? Well, that part's kind of irrelevant in this conversation if they were just going to sign Marner potentially.
Rantanen.
Or, sorry,
Yeah,
Rantanen.
Rantanen instead of Marner.
Yes, exactly. So does that mean it's just kind of at a point where it's like, okay, Marner's a great player. We've got him for the rest of this year, but that's probably it. Maybe.
With the way the cap's going, they don't necessarily. And like we had talked about last episode, like bringing Brandon Carlo, very good value contracts.
Yeah.
Toronto's actually got a lot of good deals on their books with the cap rising as well. Cap space and like actually improving their depth as well as like some of the prospects that they kind of have knocking on the door. There's the ability to not necessarily worry about giving Marner the big contract. So
Yeah.
again, and the fact that they're willing to do it seemingly with Rantanen really starts to raise some questions if they think it's time to shake up their core, and he's obviously the obvious name.
The other interesting thing to me, and I go back and forth a little bit in my head, and kind of I'm going to come to the conclusion where I think my general opinion to this is it depends. Which player would you rather have? I think it depends what team I represent.
I was going to ask you the same question.
So the first thing that popped into my head when I saw those rumors or reports, whatever we want to call them, I love the idea of Marner in Carolina.
Yeah.
I think as far as an elite player is concerned, he might be one of the better fits for Carolina. Instead of Rantanen specifically, I should say. I think his full overall play fits Carolina way better than Rantanen's style of play. When I look at Toronto, I struggle to pick. I think there are some things in Marner's game where he's a lot more of a two-way player than Rantanen. And that's important for Toronto, but I also think Rantanen's style of just heavy offensive game, just elite playmaking and shooting, like pair that with Matthews
Or Nylander.
or Nylander. But I mean, you're probably looking at him with Matthews because you're Nylander or Rantanen would have to flip sides pretty much. But you pretty much, I don't know. I feel like the offensive output of Rantanen being in Toronto could be off the charts. Very similar to the way it was in Colorado. So I guess I don't really know, I guess, to get back to your general main question of like what does this mean for Toronto and Marner? Do they want a different type of elite player if they're going to be paying an elite player that money? Maybe. maybe more of a clear goal scorer. Marner can score, but he's less shooter and more playmaker. So I don't know. Maybe he leaves, but it'll be interesting. I also wonder, and this is something we look at all the time. How does that Rantanen deal impact Marner? I think Marner beats that pretty easily.
I think if phrase it this, I won't say he beats it pretty easily if he stays in Toronto. I think he does, but I don't know if it's like a sure thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Open market, supply, demand, and we'll kind of continue this discussion here.
Right.
Absolutely. Like we projected him 8 years, 12.5 million basically. I think that makes a lot of sense with kind of Toronto's contract structure and all that stuff. I mean, that's beating Rantanen technically. After tax, it's not, but
right.
It's beating Rantanen. I think open market. I think he pushes 14. Is that insane to say?
I don't think so.
Maybe even.
Let's keep in
more.
mind this 12.6 we projected percentage wise would still be under Nylander.
Yeah.
So to think he open market could push past 13 and even closer to 14, I don't think that's far fetched at all.
So, I mean, not that I'm not going to tell anyone how to choose how much money they should or shouldn't make, but I think he's leaving money on the table if he stays in Toronto.
Yes.
Like, I think that's almost guaranteed.
Yeah, I don't think they would pay him what he could get top dollar on the open market.
I'll go here really quickly. One interesting consideration here. The Chris Tanev situation last offseason with the tax kind of thing. So Marner's a Canadian, grew up in the Toronto area, has made a lot of money already playing in Canada. I sure hope he's got a lot of money saved and invested with how much he's made. No, I don't necessarily know, but I sure hope that's the case. If he were to go to a U.S. team, he can still be a Canadian tax resident, but he's not going to necessarily. So if he wanted to go sign with Vegas, for example, I'll throw that out there because that seems like something Vegas would do.
Good fit too. Yeah.
And a player they could actually use.
Yeah.
Very, very. So Vegas provides one of the best income tax situations in the league. He would have to make a decision whether he would want to deemingly dispossess his financials. So he would basically figure out what the capital gains on all the stocks he holds at the time of his departure from Canada and pay a tax on that to then take advantage of the favorable tax rates in U.S., mostly because of the state situation compared to Ontario as a province.
Right.
If not, he's not necessarily getting a tax advantage by going to any U.S. team if he ends up staying as a Canadian resident. So that could be an interesting consideration. Like, so I guess when I say he could in theory take less, or he probably will end up with less, maybe actually Toronto is not less because he doesn't have to worry about that tax. Like it's an interesting dynamic, just like kind of when Chris Tanev was thinking about staying in Dallas and then ultimately didn't because of the tax thing. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't know how many other Canadian teams could necessarily. I guess Calgary probably could. Vancouver
Definitely could.
Montreal probably not. I mean, if they move some money around.
I was gonna say Marner's the type of player you move money around if he's interested.
Yeah. Ottawa probably is not making that work.
Probably not.
Especially after already moving out Josh Norris, but bring Dylan Cousins in.
Yeah.
Winnipeg, I don't. I mean, maybe. But
Winnipeg could. I think they could. I don't know if it's the way I would go if I was them.
that's, yeah. So, anyways, he's going to be the top unrestricted free agent forward. You know what? Let me throw this out there. It's jokingly been talked about because of Mitch Marner's football fandom. How about Mitch Marner to the Buffalo Sabres playing the same? Mitch Marner is a big Buffalo Bills Josh Allen fan, and the other reason that does make some sense is he basically could still almost live home.
Yeah,
like
could live in Canada.
Exactly. I mean, or yeah, he can live just on the other side of the border. Could live in Buffalo like area, and tax wise, it's not a huge, quite as big of a difference. Like,
Right.
just
And if in general close to home matters, that box is checked.
correct.
So I don't disagree at all. If I'm Buffalo, like I'm probably interested in doing that. Saw some tweets or posts, I don't know what to call them, on X, if they're still tweets or not, about that idea. And I think my perspective, my opinion on that is if you are Buffalo and the goal is not to win a Stanley Cup at this point. It's just not. If it is, that's you're looking too far into the future. The goal is to just make the playoffs.
Yeah.
I saw some hesitation on like, well, Marner in the playoffs hasn't always been great. If you're a Buffalo Sabres fan, you should not care about whether or not Marner is good in the playoffs.
Correct. Get there.
You just need to get there in the first place. Then worry about it.
Yeah.
So, yes, I 100% agree with you that Marner should be discussed with Buffalo. Whether that conversation gets far at all with Marner himself, who knows? Could very well not. But interest should be there.
Yeah. I think for
many teams to be.
Oh, yes.
Too.
A lot
most
of
teams should have interest.
I think Utah's going to probably throw a big offer his way as well, which also on ice makes a lot of fit. The fit on ice makes a lot of sense, as well as off ice from a marketing standpoint and like splash and everything. Like that makes a lot of sense as well. But it'll be interesting if he does hit the market. But I was more willing to have this conversation after the fallout from the trade deadline. I had assumed, so we had done a unrestricted free agent kind of look ahead right with our extension release, and then I think a couple days later Mikko Rantanen was traded, and I very casually said in that episode I expect both Rantanen and Marner to re-sign with where they are. Obviously Rantanen did not re-sign with where he is. He's off the board now, and Marner now seems very seriously like 50-50.
Yeah.
I thought it was silly to kind of speculate until he truly was out there, but now he seemingly is out there.
Yes. After this situation unfolding at the deadline, I think it's a very real possibility he could be out of Toronto.
Yeah.
Come the fall.
Yeah.
Well, really the summer, but different uniform in the fall.
So I think Marner's a big winner from the Rantanen extension being done, and then the other big winner, and I think potentially maybe the person that Toronto maybe pivots to instead of Marner if they are looking for that goal scorer is the other top unrestricted free agent forward who did not get traded at the deadline. Maybe should have. We can talk. That we've kind of already went past our deadline. Like, I don't know how much we want to dwell on, but that's Brock Boeser from Vancouver.
Yeah, sounds like extension talks were kind of far apart enough, at least that like it's not close. Hasn't been. They don't move them. They're iffy on playoffs this year. JT Miller's moved. Supposedly some in the locker room weren't happy with that. Some were fine with it. Boeser, I don't really know what Vancouver is going to try and do. They very recently were on the way up and seemed like they were going to be a tough team to deal with for years to come, and it's almost kind of falling apart a little bit. It's not unsalvageable, but might be close. If Boeser leaves, Patterson doesn't rebound, that's concerning. And then you're not too far away from Hughes needing a new contract. And does he stay? Might need to trade Quinn Hughes. Like, this could go from looking pretty good for the foreseeable future to looking terrible for Vancouver. They didn't really signal what way they were going to try and go. No trade and no extension for Boeser. So it probably helps Rantanen deal getting done. If Marner were to get done before free agency, he is the best winger goal scorer on the market.
I mean, even if Marner's out there, Boeser from a pure goal scoring standpoint is
better.
So like, again, if Toronto's looking for a change up but still looking for a top end player, I mean, Boeser's not Rantanen. Let me be very clear.
A little cheaper option too, which when we're talking cap management, that could actually be attractive to Toronto.
We have Boeser projected what, about $9 million a year at this point?
I think it was 7 by 9,
something like that. Yeah.
Yes, 7 by 9, 7 by 9.1 was where we had him in January. So
that would be about $3 million, 3.5 under Marner, $3 million under what Rantanen ultimately signed for. Yeah. I imagine if Rantanen was signing with Toronto, it was more than he got in Dallas. I would imagine. Yeah. I don't know how much more. He probably doesn't get above Matthews, but probably 13 in Toronto, maybe 13 and a half, just below Matthews. But anyways, yeah, Boeser would save some dollars, you would assume, and provide the scoring. Again, not necessarily the exact same level as Rantanen, but not that far off either, and especially for the discount, the cheaper price, put them with some elite playmakers who aren't kind of feuding in the locker room, and maybe things go a little bit better.
There's a lot, at least on X, there's a lot of Vancouver fans that seem to be fine with Boeser being gone, especially if he comes anywhere close to our extension number.
Yeah, I think we get the most random notifications about, I would never do that Boeser extension number from AFP Analytics.
Yeah. Pure goal scorer, top 6 goal scorer. He's not having the greatest season. No one in Vancouver really is, other than Quinn Hughes when he's healthy. I tend to lean towards teams are probably going to view that as a Vancouver issue and not specifically a Brock Boeser issue. And when you have a chance to sign someone who is that good as far as just shooting the puck, it's going to cost a lot. And if, as you kind of started this specific conversation, if he's the top guy out there at that point, or even the second guy with Rantanen off the table now, that's going to help him. A lot of teams that are in on Marner, if he's a free agent at that point, whoever loses out on Marner is good chance they turn to Boeser. So there's going to be a high level of interest in a player like him.
Yeah, I was just kind of pulling our contract projections, doing a quick sort. Rantanen was our top projected player off the board.
Yep.
So now it's, as you just alluded to, Mitch Marner, Brock Boeser, and then we're already moving down to John Tavares, Brad Marchand, and I think Brock Nelson.
Ehlers as well.
Ehlers as well. Yep. Missed Ehlers. Yep.
But yeah, so it starts to, those are still very good players, but it does start to drop a little bit.
Yep. And again, you take one more of those off the board, and it gets thin pretty quickly, especially with teams like they're going to have cap space to work with this summer because of the rising cap, and knowing the cap the next couple of years might make them okay paying an elite level forward, especially one who can score goals like Brock Boeser.
Yeah.
So the Rantanen trade, kind of bring this back, like it's going to have a pretty significant trickle down effect. First, changes the supply demand of the market, probably pushes some of the top names up. And it also gave us a little bit of a clue into maybe that Marner might be a little bit more available or a little bit less likely to stay in Toronto, which, yeah, like that'll make July 1st really, really fun. And yeah, I don't know. Any more thoughts on the
On Marner,
and the kind of top
no.
forwards?
Boeser, no, I don't think so. Yeah, don't think so. Any other non-trades?
Yeah, so the other one I definitely wanted to get to, that this one was bizarre.
Yep.
So Thursday night going into Friday, there were two dual rumors going on that were real juicy. One ultimately came to fruition. It was the Rantanen one. Like there was talk that a deal to Dallas was going to happen pending an extension, and then like I know Elliot Friedman had doubled down a couple times, and I think Dreger had as well. Like the trade's in place. This is down
Yeah.
to Rantanen making a decision on the extension, but like this is going to happen if the extension gets done. So like those something like that's not out of the norm, like for respected insiders to like say this is done. You know, we got this one final hurdle to clear. But in duality, I think actually this happened a little bit before, but these were both kind of moving almost at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm not going to call out reporters here because obviously something we can get into maybe what happened, but multiple credible reporters, like very credible national people, we're not talking, like, no offense to some bloggers or anything like that, but we're not talking bloggers, very local people. We're talking national credible
The
reporters.
top people that you have your notifications set for.
M-
Like that type level of source or resource, whatever you want to call them.
m-
Reporter.
Multiple of them had said JJ Peterka from Buffalo is gaining steam, almost done, almost traded to the New York Rangers. Then I will give credit to the person who shut it down. Arthur Staple from The Athletic came out and said no truth to any of that. Rangers haven't been talking. Shut down, not another mention of that at all. we like we don't see that in hockey.
No.
Really,
I
any
mean,
sport.
it's really not common in any sport, really, but specifically hockey, that doesn't happen. The Sabres GM, Kevin Adams, pretty much said absolutely not, like that. No truth to it.
Yeah.
I don't want to say he said ridiculous, but his press conference interview post trade deadline, he pretty much alluded to there was absolutely no truth to that. So yeah, that's a very odd one. So this was also before the Cousins deal. So I think really quickly, just when those initial reports came out, a lot of people were like, okay, this is Buffalo's kind of shakeup. A whole lot of people kind of saying, well, Buffalo, if you wanted a shakeup, you can't trade your bad players to teams. Like, they're going to want the guys who are performing still. But yeah, so I guess it's tough to say, really. I've said this to you, my head kind of starts spinning trying to think of what happened there. If it was kind of a vague message from a source, but usually the top reporters, insiders like this, are not going to run with something that's vague or kind of assume based off of a vague statement. So I don't know if it's really that. Just, I guess one of the sources had something completely wrong. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't like. I don't know.
It's also so here's what mystifies me even more is, as you mentioned, Sabres GM Kevin Adams like very strongly refuted it. I don't think the leak came from the Sabres building. But then a New York Rangers reporter was the one to completely shut it down. Where in the world, like, where did it come from?
Yeah.
Like, I think logically for a little while it's like, oh, this is coming from the Rangers, like they're trying to push this, like I. But then the Rangers reporter's the one who comes out and just full on refutes it. Like,
Yeah.
Man,
It's a very, very weird one. And I think to almost kind of get to the point you were mentioning there is a lot of different reports, different situations, not this one. Many reports and rumors, you can kind of try to dissect them a little bit, and you don't know for sure, but you can sometimes figure out like who is this benefiting? Where is this rumor, idea, thought coming from? This is one where it is very just strange. Doesn't really make sense that it came from anywhere, really.
the agent.
Potentially. Still a strange. That's
There's
the issue there is that's a very strange thing to put out on
yeah,
a trade deadline day. Let's say supposedly there really haven't been extension talks yet.
yeah,
According, I believe, to Kevin Adams, the Sabres GM. But let's even say that there were. Maybe Adams lied, let's say, and there have been extension talks and they aren't going very well. If an agent were to put out a rumor like that, something that strong a player is being traded, that is trying to choose my words carefully, but that is like something that would kill relationships, could kill negotiations completely.
yeah.
So that would be like a very, very strong action for an agent to take. So I don't think it's really that either.
And I don't
by
see
any means.
I don't see the leverage, the motivation for in
Right.
right now. Like if this was the summer and it's like, oh, this team's preparing an offer sheet.
Yeah.
Okay, well that makes sense to come from an agent because it might be pushing something to get done.
But like what does it do now?
Exactly.
Yeah. Especially something that is that strong. A deal is
Imminent,
yeah,
like
gaining steam. It was heavily implied that a deal was about to be completed
yeah,
between the Sabres and
yeah,
the Rangers.
yeah.
So like yeah, that doesn't benefit anyone
No.
really.
So I think the first question is there maybe something there, like, okay, did it get out, did Adams deny, but is there actually something to look at in the summer?
Maybe. Tough to say, but it's not impossible.
I mean, there's players on the Rangers that would have been a fit.
Yeah.
We speculate like Keandre Miller, Braden Schneider, one of those two defensemen. Will Cooley up front would have, like, a defenseman and Cooley would have made a lot of sense for Peterka in particular. Like that's a trade
Yeah.
that benefits both. Like it's a hockey trade.
Buffalo probably sends back
Something
else, but
yes.
those players specifically, like
The
those are the names that would have had to been on the table for
correct.
Peterka
Yes.
to
Yep.
be on the
Yep.
table.
Yep. So I guess we won't know until the summer. There were if then. Well, so I will say there were some also on Peterka, some very light smoke about the words offer sheet
Yeah.
associated with that. I mean, it's not like Buffalo's not going to have cap space to match an offer sheet, so I guess we'll see where it goes. Like the threat of an offer sheet for Peterka is a lot less menacing than when St. Louis did to Edmonton in the
Right.
offseason, because that was putting Edmonton in very much a cap crunch. This is maybe putting Buffalo in a place a little uncomfortable situation, but in theory, money wise, they should be able to make it work.
You could offer Peterka an absolutely ridiculous deal. The reason for Buffalo not matching is it wouldn't be because of cap space. It would be because it's a ridiculous value deal.
It would kind of be like many years ago. Thomas Vanek got an offer sheet from the Oilers.
Yeah.
Buffalo matched it, but like you could have justified taking the 4 first round picks at the time for Vanek.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll we'll see what happens there. Another Sabre name that was kind of on the trade board, and I think we'll do a longer Sabre episode, so we won't talk too much about this. Bo Byram's name had been out there and kind of mentioned as well by Kevin Adams, and I think you had listened to the press conference and come away with a takeaway. I guess I'll let you, instead of, I mean, other people had said it kind of on X, but why don't you kind of sum up your thought of it?
I'll start with saying just the general vibe, tone of the way he was talking about it. Very complimentary of the player. He's still on the team. You'd expect that. But there kind of seemed to be just, there was just a little bit of a vibe of like, no sure thing that he's a long-term piece. One of the things that he specifically said, which I found interesting, a lot of Sabres X, we'll call it, the Sabres fan community on X, has come to the conclusion, and I don't disagree, I can see it myself looking at data. Byram looks great when he's playing with Rasmus Dahlin. When he's not, he heavily struggles. Adams specifically said, and there was like a slight tone shift even with it, yeah, Byram's been great with Dahlin. And I wonder, like, he's never going to bash a player in the media. GMs, well, some GMs do, but
it's definitely
Adams
not his style.
Yeah, it's not his style whatsoever. This could very well not be the case. I wonder if there's a little something behind that comment that he kind of, again, Adams probably doesn't want to show his hand at all there, but I just wonder if there's a little bit of like, team knows like he can play very well at a high level in a lot of minutes when he's playing with their franchise Norris level defenseman.
Yeah.
And they also see what happens when he isn't.
Yeah.
Maybe not. But that specific comment, the way he said it, and then kind of the general tone of talking about Byram, it seemed very far from a sure thing that he's in Buffalo next year.
Yeah, and so we'll I think look to do a Sabres episode. I think the Peterka Byram things in particular are interesting, breaking down the Cousins trade a little bit more. But my last thought here is I will say there is, so it's a fine line, because you do want someone who can complement your star defenseman well, but it needs to be for the right price, and it need
Right.
so I'm not going to sit here and pound the table and say you got to bring him back, because a lot of players who play with Rasmus Dahlin get up, like that works because Dahlin, as you said, is so good. But there is something to be said for kind of each other elevating each other's games, and it's not like anyone, like, assuming, let me put it this way, assuming that you can pick up someone off the street to do what Byram is doing is a little bit, and I'm not saying you're assuming this, but like just in general, it could be a stretch to assume, oh yeah, we'll just sign this insert unrestricted free agent name here. he'll play with Dahlin and it'll be fine. Like they had done that with Connor Clifton a couple of years ago, and that did not work.
Yeah. Henry Jokiharju
Has been
good with Dahlin.
Had been.
Well, had been. Yeah, he's gone now, but and he wasn't the offensive presence that Byram is. But I think at this point we're almost we're past what does the partner do for Dahlin.
Yep.
He's at his level now. Byram is a good fit with him, clearly. They play very well together. My worry is if you need to pay Byram top pair or even top 3 defenseman money.
And has to be anchored to Dahlin, basically.
Yeah. There's no flexibility there. Correct. Based off of what we've seen.
So that's the other side to the coin I was kind of getting at.
That's the issue.
Is if he wants a market value, what we have market value or even above market value, like we're like 6 or 7 million, I think.
7.3.
So, okay.
Yeah. So
if he wants that contract so he's an restricted free agent, but like that's kind of what Brandon Montour got last year in unrestricted free agency.
Yeah.
So having an ask right around there would not be insane for Byram. That's where you're like, okay, can we do better with our cap assets? Like if we're going to pay that money, we might want a different type of impact player. So a couple other names I think we'll kind of throw out and then kind of call it a wrap for this episode. We end up going a lot longer on those couple guys than we were thinking of. Another kind of in the Peterka realm, Brant Clark, LA Kings. Interesting because it was not he's going to be traded, but his name was out there a lot. And then you had mentioned before we had recorded this episode that Kings GM Rob Blake had also kind of shut that down a little bit. I mean, again, you're not going to, if you're a GM, come out and say, oh yeah, we were real close to trading this guy.
Yeah.
You're not going to say that.
Deadline's over and he's got to be on your team.
Yeah, you don't want to end up in a Los Angeles Lakers situation where the guy ends up back on your roster after a failed physical type thing.
Or he asked Mitch Marner to waive his no move clause.
Correct.
And he didn't.
Yep. So you don't want to end up with that. So it makes sense that he said no, but it also like the Kings don't have to trade Brant Clark, and there's a lot of reasons not to do it. But it's interesting that his name, really since this turn of the calendar, has started to be out there a little bit. Really since Drew Doughty's been back.
That's the big part. Is definitely there has been some healthy scratches here and there, and that's consistently inconsistent healthy scratches, if that makes any sense. So just with that, and then how deep of a team they are defensively, people are going to speculate, right? So that's where I think a lot of the rumors probably came from, is just connect the dots. This could make sense, especially having a need up front for a scorer. That would just make a lot of sense. So maybe that's all it really was. Maybe there was actually some real rumblings, some reporters hearing potential deals being discussed. It would almost be odd if, when he was asked about Brant Clark, if Rob Blake said, yeah, like we were willing to do something, we just couldn't find something. That would have been a really weird response.
Yeah.
So even though we shut it down, same as Peterka, like Adam shut it down, it doesn't mean it actually was completely off the table. We don't know for sure, but I don't know. I think even looking to the summer, Clark, like it would make sense for his name to potentially be out there. I really look at it with LA as maybe it makes more sense for a name like Jordan Spence to be out there. A little bit further along in the contract. What's the word I'm looking for? Just contract. Schedule. Yeah.
Career arc trajectory. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit further along. Not quite the same potential as Brant Clark, so it might make more sense that he's the name we start to hear more about in the off season. But yeah, interesting one that it was kind of consistently out there for weeks, really.
Yeah. That's really like why I thought bringing him up. Then a couple more names, all from St. Louis to varying degrees.
Yeah.
The one that was really out there was Braden Shen. A lot of talk about him and Luke ending up playing together. And then it had to be squashed pretty quickly after Winnipeg acquired Luke. That no, they're not going to go get Braden. The price is too high.
Which
But like,
fit wise,
exactly.
yeah, all of a sudden it made a lot of sense.
But it was not a quick one off. It was very much the week and a half, 2 weeks leading up to the deadline that Braden Shen very much could be available.
Yep.
I know that there had been reports about what the Blues had asked Toronto for, and it was a very. I think ultimately the consensus I took away, the Blues have their asking price set too high.
It was pretty much a we don't want to move Shen, but if you really want him, you could pretty much overpay to a point where we can't
But it also
justifiably say no.
But it also seems like they kind of want to move him.
I think it's kind of one of those situations where he's their captain. There's still some term left, and they're not like actively ready to pull the trigger to move on. I don't know.
Couple other names in St. Louis, a little lesser extent that they were out there, but I did see them floated to various degrees. Jordan Kyrou, who had signed a big extension a couple years ago and is probably, I would say, probably not living up to the contract he got.
He's been good.
Yes, and that's why I hesitated because like his contract isn't bad, but it's not like great. It's kind of drawing a comparison to a trade that did happen. It's kind of like Josh Norris with Ottawa. Like that might be a little strong, but
It's yeah. I like Kyrou as a player still. I think he's been pretty solid. That to me, honestly, that was kind of a weird one to hear out there.
Yeah,
Personally, Buchnevich makes more sense when you're not considering contracts that he could maybe be available just if they're looking to retool the slightly older player. The fact that you just signed him to an extension that's not even started yet, that was odd to me to hear his name.
But the fact that I think Elliot Friedman had reported that when he signed the extension, no trade clause was included in it. Like that doesn't go out for no reason.
Right. No, I think it's very much a It's not Pedersen level. I don't think there's like an unhappiness or issue with the player, but I think it's this $8 million 7-year contract is about to start. If we're going to get out of it in the near future, now would be the time.
Yeah.
And both of those names were kind of some that surfaced a little bit and then it went a little quiet even as we kind of were led into the deadline. There wasn't a whole lot going on around them. It was a little more heavily Shen.
Yeah. Anyone else we wanted to hit on, or do we wrap it here?
I think the main thing I want to do, we don't even really need to cover the deals so much, but just to kind of keep an idea of UFA and things that have happened in the past week or two. There were some extensions, so you pretty much, let's see, looking March 1st and on, Olimata re-upped in Utah.
Utah did three extensions. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mata,
so
Cole, and Vejmelka.
Vejmelka's big as well. Sticking with the goalie market, Charlie Lindgren also re-upped. So Add those two to Lankinen having a new deal, Logan Thompson having a new deal. The top of the goalie market is what was looking like a decent amount of options for at least like 1A, 1B. It's starting to dry up pretty quickly.
Although, let me also point out, with Lankinen getting the contract in Vancouver, you wonder if Thatcher Demko maybe could be had. He might be one of the obvious, like, top of the market goalie available.
Yep, for sure. Alexander Kerfoot was one for Utah as well.
Fine.
Jake Evans ended up that's actually trade deadline related a little bit. He was one of the more heavily rumored centers available potentially, and they extended him.
He wanted to stay. Yep. He took less money.
Oh yeah. 4 years, 2.85. That was quite a bit below. I think we were mid threes on an AAV.
And I feel like basically afterwards it came out like, Jake Evans told his agent just get it done.
Right. In Buffalo, a couple, Jordan Greenway, Jason Zucker, both staying. Greenway
2 years, $4 million. Zucker 2 years, 4.75.
Yep.
Greenway was a touch above our projection. Zucker was a touch below.
Less years for Greenway than we projected.
So I can't say I have a problem with either of those contracts for Buffalo by any means. At least value wise, absolutely fine.
So that pretty much brings us up to we've discussed Rantanen pretty heavily earlier this episode and even on the previous one, which really leaves the last big name worth, well,
two names.
Quick name, Jonathan Kovacevic for the Devils. This was a weird one to me. 5 years, $4 million cap hit. Something I guess he maybe could have gotten that on the open market. He's continued strong play. Almost gives me like Chatfield vibes for the Hurricanes.
I mean, you had raised the point of it's kind of the Will Borgen contract, so that comp makes sense with everything. So makes sense in the context of that, but
the team, the depth defensively,
exactly.
Like when everyone's healthy, he's a bottom pair guy, and when everyone's healthy, you've got some prospects trying to knock on the door. So like, it feels like there wasn't another domino to fall at the deadline, but there might be in the offseason.
Exactly. So like, I was gonna bring up Simon Nemich's name as like in the rumors.
Yeah.
I don't want to quite go there yet. I mean, I had him on my trade board, but like, you're as New Jersey. Like, I think I used the reference. We talked about Dumoulin last episode. They had acquired Dumoulin, and I think I used the reference like they're following the Detroit Red Wings pattern of just blocking their prospects. And I like, it's okay to sign good players. Players who are performing well, but I don't think they got a value contract by any means. I'm not going to say it's a drastic overpay. Like, based on our projections, it was, but that could have changed in the offseason. So I'm not going to sit here and knock them for necessarily the value of the contract, but just the logic of it.
Hamilton, Pesci, Siegenthaler, Hughes, Dillon.
Yeah.
They're all under contract next year.
So now you add Kovacevic to that. Yep. So there's 6.
Nemec, Casey. Last year's draft was Silyev, a defenseman out of Russia. Going to be a few years, but like a high draft pick defenseman. There's a lot of defensive depth, so it feels like a move's coming. That now leads us to the last big contract. Wanted to mention Wyatt Johnston, new deal with Dallas. So this ultimately long-term, we'll look at it, came in a little bit higher AAV-wise than we had projected. I think we were in the 7s.
Very high 7s. It was just...
Okay. So we were high 7s. We were like 7.5.
Okay, yeah.
He comes in at 8.4, so $900K higher. We had 7 years. He only went for 5 years.
Yeah.
And this is a little interesting to talk about. So that 5 years only buys 1 UFA year.
Correct.
we don't have to go too in depth about it. We have before, but could we see some players go a little shorter for an RFA, buy less UFA years, and hit the market at a young age? That's great, but with the cap rising more significantly year to year, it could make sense on the player side to try and keep the deals at a lower term.
Yeah, I think our projection. So Wyatt Johnston's first half of the season was not great, especially leading into when we were doing the projections. Like, he's still a very good player.
Yes.
I was responsible for the RFAs, and it looked like he was maybe not having enough of a season to set himself up for this level of payday. His last month and a half have been quite good, which kind of make it's
that right there is one example, and we could go through a bunch more that have signed extensions in the past couple of months. Is in a way for us, at least, perception of how well we're doing with these. I find it a lot tougher to do projections mid-season than at the end of a season, because there's the very big question of, like, does the 30 games that they just completed, like, how much of an impact does that have in raising or lowering, whatever words I want to use, the value of a player?
So I'll say that's true. I'll also say, in tandem with doing extensions in the offseason, there's kind of a question going into the projection of what would be the motive for getting this deal done.
Yeah.
Offseason, it has to get done because they need a new contract.
Yep.
But if there's any sort of term left, there's always a question of why sign it now?
Yeah.
And that's really hard to capture. So a team will sign it now because think they're getting very good value. A player will sign it now because they think they're getting very good value. So you're trying to meld those two things together and figure out who's going to come out on top. Like Kovacevic, he's signing it now because he's getting very good value.
Yeah.
That's why it's getting done. So I think doing non-off season when contracts have to be done are definitely a little bit tougher, and why we see things all over the board. Because conversely, Jake Evans really wanted to stay in Montreal, so he got the deal done, so he wasn't traded or anything like that. He probably took less than he could have gotten, but there was a motive there.
Yeah.
And that's why that contract got done.
Yeah, pretty much. That's probably, like, best way to explain it.
So I think that's pretty good wrap up for this episode. We appreciate you listening. Max Stern Podcast, available pretty much all major podcast platforms. Content, including those contract projections, available on X and Blue Sky at AFP Analytics. And we'll talk to you next time.